does a workbook and they're coloring pages and that's in English.
Yeah.
But the kid doesn't enjoy it. Or it's just 1 hour a week, 1 hour or 45 minutes. That's very little exposure. I would say it is far more superior, the parent who's using English at home, than sending them to this type of activity. Of course, if your child likes this activity and you're doing it in addition to have more exposure to English, that's great. But what I would like people to hear is that your language abilities and using it at home, and already the bond and the special relationship that you have with your child makes it the ideal place to start learning English from a young age at home. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that's not to say that like an English course in a place, in a school or an English club or something, that those things can't be great experiences and valuable experiences too. It's just not as black and white as saying English learning for kids has to happen in an institutional environment.
Exactly.
It can be extremely effective in the home environment as well. Even if English is not your first language, just doing these things and establishing English in a habitual way from a very early age can be tremendously effective as well. It's just, I suppose it's just trying to change maybe some attitudes that people have about, how and where and with who English can be learned for children. Yeah.
Exactly.
Any other habits that you want to talk about?
Well, the last part that we could talk about with playtime is, of course, using songs. And this also kind of leads to the next point, which is stories, using stories. So songs are obviously incredible because kids will sing them. You start singing them. You can be funny and silly. There's obviously a lot of different, Super Simple Songs is a great YouTube channel.
Super Simple Songs on YouTube.
Exactly. Super Simple Songs. They have classic songs. So like, the wheels on the bus go round and round. They also have original songs that they write themselves that are funny and goofy. And as the channel says, they are very, they're super simple. So they're great to use. So I definitely recommend that channel. And then the last one and my favorite is stories. Obviously, I have a podcast called Into the Story. I love stories. I live stories. So starting with books. I mean, books are an incredible way to just start using English. If you can get an English book, if you can buy it, go to the library, it's perfect. You can also use books in your own language and just, normally it's like, there's a red square or very simple things that you just translate the story. You just say what you're looking at and describe it. Kids don't read, of course, until after usually this age group. So stories are brilliant. And to bring me to the last part, the last habit, it is podcasts. Of course, people listening to podcasts know that podcasts are amazing for your kids. And perhaps even you have listened to Luke's English podcast when your kids were around. And
oh, really?
Their ears perked up. Or maybe not your podcast.
Well, they do. Actually, I get, regular correspondence from listeners, and some people are like, oh yeah, we listen to the podcast with the kids. And I was like, oh really? You mean you listened to that one episode I did? The one about the, that dodgy, like you listened to the swearing episode? You listened to that with your kids?
That's the one you chose?
Did you really?
But, I mean, you notice when kids listen to anything, they'll eventually repeat it or even ask like, hey, what does this mean? They could even ask it in their own language, right? What does this word mean? Or what did he say? Or why did you laugh? When they have English in their linguistic landscape, when they have English they can hear it around them, they will naturally develop an interest in them. Mm-hmm. And there are so many podcasts that are designed for kids. Now, most of them are designed for kids who speak English as their first language, so they can be a little bit more difficult. But there are some that are a little bit simpler and enjoyable, quite frankly, for you to listen to as well. Like, I'm not talking about putting earphones on your kid, pressing play and walking away. I'm talking about, you're in the car or you're making food and, hey, let's put on this story. Now, specifically, stories are great for kids because they just think in stories. They think in narrative where there's a character. They follow that character through an event that happens and then there's a resolution. It's very easy for them to follow that format. Compared to another podcast for kids, perhaps, that's talking about science or some sort of facts where there is no narrative, there is no central character. So I really do recommend stories because they can listen to it, they can follow it, and they can listen to it several times, which kids normally like listening to. I don't know how many times you've watched Frozen or whatever your daughter's favorite movie is, but too many times.
Far too many times, Bree.
Yeah. And there's a podcast that I think it's by the BBC that maybe they don't do it anymore, but it's Listen and Play. Or maybe that, yeah. BBC's Listen and Play. They also have Story for Kids or Playtime. Lingo Kids has a podcast as well. So there's options that are really good. So if you're a listener of podcasts and you're looking for a way to start using English at home, I would just pick a podcast and see if you're interested in it. Start listening to it around your kid. That's a really great place to start. Yes.
I do listen to stories with my daughter when it's the two of us having dinner together. For example, if her mum's got something on in the evening and it's just the two of us having dinner. Obviously now the little boy as well is there.
Yeah.
Taking it all in. He's got no idea what's going on, but he listens to the story too. And we sit there and while we're having dinner, we'll listen to a story. We discovered one a podcast recently, which is, if I can just find it here in Pocket Casts, Super Great Kids Stories. Super Great Kids Stories. And so we've been listening to that, and we sit there and we kind of listen to the story together. And when something happens, we kind of look at each other like, "Ooh," like that. It's quite funny to see. She'll look at me, kind of obviously listen to the story together, comment on things that happen, and it's just great to just like when something happens to see her look over at me, and we both kind of share a look of like, "Oh wow, that's interesting, isn't it? Oh wow, that's scary," or yeah.
Exactly. And that in that way, by co-listening, so by listening together with them, it makes it a much more interactive experience. You're both experiencing the same events in the stories. You're both imagining probably similar things. So it makes it a nice experience to share together.
Plus, sometimes you can just, pause and, say, did you understand what that meant? Or do you know what that word is? And just, just to clarify, in case they need something to be explained. Because sometimes in some stories, there's like one word that gets used a lot. If it's like an object or a particular feature of the story. And, you can just be there to just make sure they understand what that is, without interrupting the story too much.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any encouragement for my listeners at the end here?
Well, I guess I would say, I've said throughout our talk today that this is something like you can't do it wrong. Like the only thing you could actually do wrong was kind of what we joked about, was kind of criticizing and say, no, you said it wrong, or no, you have to use this word.
Or just not doing it at all.
Or just not doing it at all. And because you have a level of English and hiding that from them, this is a part of yourself that you have to share and would be very beneficial to share. So not using it, that would be a mistake in my opinion, if you really do value them having English in their lives. I think it's just such an amazing tool. So too much rigidity, so being too rigid, being too strict is the enemy of a good habit. Okay? So what does this mean? We talked about these different habits today. If you're going to be too rigid, if you're going to be too strict about it, I always speak in English during bath time. I always speak, on Sundays during playtime in English. If you're going to be that strict about it, that's a good way to not develop a habit. being more relaxed about it, being, well, if I think of it and it happens, then I'll use English during bath time. And eventually it'll feel more natural and you'll start doing it more. But if you're too strict, then it's probably not going to become a habit. They've done studies with this, people who go to the gym, the people who are like, I always go to the gym at this time in the morning, when they're so rigid, it doesn't allow space in their life to, for things to happen, which things always happen. So when they say, well, if I don't go at this time, then I go at that time. And if I don't go this day, it's fine. I'll go the next day. So being just relaxed about it. Don't be too rigid, but be consistent, of course. And just start with something small. Don't say I'm going to speak. Well, you can, but don't imagine that you're going to all of a sudden start speaking in all the routines in English. You can just start with a song. You can start with Cosmic Kids. You can start by listening to a podcast. So starting with a very small thing and slowly start opening that English time at home. I think that is the best place to start. Just start at all. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. That's an old Chinese proverb, but it's just to say that, start today and start with something small.
Yes. Lovely. Thanks for all the advice. I'm saying that on behalf of my listeners.
Absolutely, yeah.
And myself as well. But great. Okay. So listeners, again, Into the Story is Bree's podcast, and you can go there and check it out if you want to hear that story of my dramatic adventure in Paris.
Absolutely.
You can see what happened.
It's a family-friendly story. They can listen.
I just about managed to make it family-friendly. It was borderline. Some of the things that happened in the story could have been a bit more explicit, but I managed to make it family friendly. So yeah, and hopefully you'll find it funny, everyone.
Yeah, and all of our stories are family friendly, and it's something you could listen to with kids if you wanted. But we are also working on a story, a podcast meant to be listened to with families and with kids, to be engaging for kids, and just for what we've talked about today. That families can enjoy listening to it together and kids enjoy it, and it's their first experience with English. So if you do, we will be announcing that on our podcast at some point this fall, winter. So if people want more information about that, then they can listen to Into the Story.
Okay, fantastic. Details in the show notes, everyone. Okay. All right. Well, Bree, thank you. Brilliant.
Thank you.
And nice to meet you. Nice to speak to you.
Nice speaking to you.
Bye.
All right. Take care. Bye.